when you were just talking about there's all these moving pieces and it's like it's never done. There's going to be so many things to track and so many scenarios. I mean, I'm already thinking about like December, Christmas, January. That's going to be the confluence of a lot of things. And I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but whatever. I do it too much. Jack Quinn potentially coming back. World Juniors, Benson, Savoy. And then there's another big player, and I don't even know if we want to go here now, but I think you know what I'm going to throw out there.
We
might as well just kind of go for it, because there's been rumors that there's a unrestricted free agent rehabbing from a surgery that might be available, that might be from the city of Buffalo, that could become available right around that time. And that's part of that confluence of all these factors. And there's so many things that could happen between now and then. Victor Olofsson's status, right? That's another factor in this whole thing. Could a player like Yuri Kulik force his way up where he can't be contained? There's all these things. But now you have some major insiders, Darren Dreger, Elliot Friedman, maybe some others that I've missed have opined that the Sabres are interested in, or at least kicking the tires, right, in Patrick Kane.
Yeah, it's been phrased quite a few different ways. I'm going to look up I believe Pierre LeBrun said that he thinks it will be Florida. The thing right now to remember about Patrick Kane is that nobody knows quite yet, because Patrick Kane is going to assess things, based on the reporting that's been out there, is that he will kind of assess things a month from now when he's healthy, who's competitive, who's interested, and make his list. So that was kind of the Pierre LeBrun, the way he kind of, set the stage for it. Elliot Friedman, I think, reported.
Which I feel, by the way, is what Kane did last year too, right? He just kind of sat back, assessed everything, and then he landed on one team that he wanted to be traded to. But please, I just wanted to.
And it makes sense for him, right? Like he's winding down in terms of how many years he has left. And if he were to sign right now, and then a month from now, the team he signs for gets off to a disappointing start before he's even healthy. So why not? But Pierre LeBrun says going to his hometown Sabres makes a lot of sense, but my prediction is that Patrick Kane ends up with the Panthers. There's been even stronger wording in the sense that, Elliot Friedman has said, there's some, legit smoke there. Darren Dreger, as you mentioned. And, a month from now or so, when Patrick Kane sits down with his agent and starts to sketch things out, we're going to have some answers to some of these Sabres questions, right? Like, how is Benson ready for 82 games? Or is it the 9 to 15 games, whatever? It doesn't have to be just 9. Burning the year, the entry level is not a huge deal. But between Savoy and Benson, are they comfortable that one of those guys could stick around? Are they potentially able to move on from Victor Olofsson and make room in the lineup that way? What's going on with the 3 goalies? Do you have any clarity there? And then ultimately, are you playing well enough that Patrick Kane is interested? And it makes more sense now to me than it ever has. He is at a stage in his career where you don't have to trade anything to get him, number one, which is, was always my big problem when people suggested it before. Why would a team that's in the business of collecting assets move one out for a pending UFA? It didn't make a lot of sense if they weren't confident they could retain him. And he was going to be a UFA anyways. They didn't have any need for him in a year where they weren't really pushing for a cup. Didn't make sense for him. Now, though, they're that much closer to contending. He's that much closer to the end of his career where maybe Buffalo, the sentimental pull really starts to get to him. And there's some connections. Don Granato from Chicago, he was an assistant on that staff. Kevin Adams was his roommate, early on in his Chicago days. And the smoke has not been put out yet, right? There's been a lot of smoke, some flames smoldering on this this rumor, and nobody's dumped cold water on it. So, but even removing all the likelihood factors from a should they do it standpoint, I've come around on it much more now than last year, just because his price has probably gone down because of the injury. Again, you're not trading anything to get him, and you're in that window where I feel very confident the locker room can handle it compared to there's no more leadership vacuum, right? You know, they have leaders all over that room, and it's not just Kyle Okposo, it's not just Alex Tuck. You've got Rasmus Dahlin, Dylan Cousins, Tage Thompson, Eric Johnson. Connor Clifton has, you know, a fair amount of leadership qualities to him. Up and down, I think, you know, Zemgus Girgensons is, you know, obviously wearing a letter. So Patrick Kane strikes me as the type of guy who'd come in and just kind of fit in, you know, in that regard. I don't think he would disrupt the locker room in any way. I think Kyle Okposo, you know, is a strong enough captain where there's no fear really of that. And on the ice, I think the fit does make some sense when we're talking about they got questions at both right winger spots in the middle six. I think, you know, Benson and Savoy, are they ready? Victor Olofsson, is he going to actually step up and take this turn? And so even when Jack Quinn comes back, you could argue there's a spot, depending on how Benson and Savoy look. And I guess Olofsson, you know, Olofsson deserves a chance, I suppose, to prove himself, but he's still not a piece beyond this year. So in that sense, there is some room to make it work in this lineup if they, you know, if they end up on his list, which got to play well in the first month to stick on the Kane list here.
There's a lot of people in this town that I think want the Sabres to stay away from the player. And he has some bad press behind him. 2015, 2016, I think even before that. I remember when he was, you know, he was a young kid, he had a lot of money. I look at it in the big picture. And again, we don't know what's going to happen with the health of the team and some of the scenarios that you just mentioned, right? There's a lot of ifs still at weighing on this team. If the Sabres are going for it and you can get a player with 3 cups, and he's a USA Hockey guy, by the way, another USA Hockey guy.
The United States of Sabres.
I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. And he's not that far removed. You can't look at his numbers last year. This was a guy who was waking up every day wondering if his body was going to feel good enough to play. So I think there is that factor also. You know, how does he recover, right? How does the rehab go? I don't know how that's going. I have no idea. In full disclosure, I was never really a big Patrick Kane fan. I tend to think, though, that he has rehabbed his image a little bit, at least around players in the league. Where, to your point, maybe he can fit in. It's not his team. He can come in and play a role. I mean, I like the concept. I like the fact that the Sabres are looking at it. I think it'd probably be just for the balance of the season. I don't think they'd have to sign him to anything. I don't think there's big dollars in play. The other thing on the image part of it, or, you know, the character concerns that I think some people want to have about the player is I can't get off the fact that there was a player that played for the Sabres who was regarded as having like among the highest character guys in the league, Kris Drury. And Kris Drury went and made that deal for Patrick Kane last year in the Rangers. And so you have Kevin Adams, who's built this core that we spent 20 minutes talking about. And he knows the player really well, and there's already a connection being made in the media. I think Drager knows. He wouldn't say it if he didn't know, right?
Right.
Some of these other guys. Kevin Adams was a character player, knows the player. Kris Drury, if it's good enough for these guys, just on the character front.
Right. Just talking from like locker room, right? Like if the locker room, and I have not covered Patrick Kane. I briefly spoke with him when the Blackhawks were in town early last season. So I'm not going to pretend to know the guy. But I have heard similar to you that he's good with younger players, that his reputation, he's become this guy who is helpful with younger players. is what I've heard about him. And he was, he seemed in that locker room with Chicago to handle that whole thing fairly well, considering how ugly it could have gotten and the state that team was in last season. I thought that whole thing went okay. And like I said, I do not know him personally. I really don't even know people who know him. I don't, I'm not, tied in with that, um, you know, South Buffalo world necessarily, but you have a lot of, I guess I would put it this way. Like you said, Chris Drury, Kevin Adams know this guy. There's a lot of guys in the Sabres organization who know this guy.
Tim
well.
Kennedy in theory knows him
Tim
well.
Kennedy, was the next name I was going to bring up.
Yeah.
I wrote about Tim Kennedy a couple months ago. He's now a development coach for the Sabres, has been for a couple years. He was supposed to be Patrick Kane before Patrick Kane, basically. He was, a year or two older and, was.
Yeah, great piece, by the way, not to polish your apples, but that was a great piece. So if anyone's watching that, hasn't read that, please go to The Athletic and check that out.
It was fun. He's a big part of what they're doing. Anybody who's developing all these first round picks, right? You're going to have a hand in how these Sabres look. But man, he should know him just about as well as anybody. And you want to talk about somebody who is tied in that area in South Buffalo and knows all the people that Patrick Kane knows. So I guess to your point, if they do it, or like in Chris Drury's case, he, made the trade, that's where you say, okay, like Kevin Adams protects that locker, like that locker room is near and dear to his heart. He's almost been moved to tears a couple times in press conferences talking about how much he believes in that group, how much he cares about those guys. He's connected on a personal level there with how that chemistry is in that room. So if they went there, they're doing so with a lot of confidence and a lot of thought into how Patrick Kane would fit in, and a lot of pretty intimate knowledge, not a lot of guesswork, because they know the guy pretty well. And I mean, a lot of conversations that, Kevin Adams was just having with Pat Brisson to get this Owen Power deal to the finish line. That's who represents Patrick Kane. So there's a lot of trust, I think, in that relationship. He also represents Matthias Samuelsson, Kyle Okposo, among others. So a lot of trust has been developed, I think, back and forth in that way. So this would not be just a dart throw. And I know Patrick Kane's past is not perfect, obviously, off the ice, but he's a dad now. He's calmed down, I think, off the ice in a big way, to where my big question with it has always been, would he want to come back? Because a lot of the trouble he got in was here. But I think now at this stage in his life, it would probably make a lot more sense for him than it would have 10 years ago. I mean, he sold the house in Hamburg a few years back, but it feels like if it's something that he wants, it makes enough sense on the Sabres side too.
Yeah, I think that, and that's where, again, there's going to be a lot of chatter about that. I think if there's still smoke on this one for a while, because, again, the image thing and the character concerns that fans might have, it does matter. I just think that you can rehab your image. Organizations can rehab their image. If you couldn't, no one would want to play in Buffalo. If you think about it from where the Sabres were 2015, 2016, when Kane had a lot of that bad pub. So I don't know, something to consider. I didn't know if we were going to go there tonight. When we were talking, and we talking about Benson and Savoy, the brain goes there, because I was just saying, man, there's going to be no shortage of things to talk about with this team for the next couple of months. And before you know it, December's going to be here, and that Kane story is going to be right there in the hockey world. And the Sabres probably are going to be in the middle of it.
Yeah, when you look at the biggest questions that we're outlining, it's on that spot in the depth chart where he would fit in. And so as we get those answers, Patrick Kane will he's going to be watching the Sabres, I'm sure. Will be among the teams, that he's keeping an eye on. We'll see how he feels health-wise. But I think what also, one more thing I'll throw onto it, is that we have a question here, and a good point really by Bob, that, can he, stay healthy for an entire season, and does that stunt the growth maybe of players on the team? Well, a fair point and a fair question, but you could also maybe say, he could take some nights off, right? They don't have to play him every night. If depending on how the roster would shake out, you need to have room for Jack Quinn. And
We
then
don't know
what
how Quinn's going to recover.
well,
I mean,
I think
that's the other factor.
that's what I was going to say. He might not be ready to play right at that 6-month timeline, and may not be quite ready to play every single night without risk of re-injuring that Achilles. So that's a big question mark. All the question marks, right, are at right wing at the moment. You know, can Benson hold up for 82 games? Does Matt Savoy deserve a look? Can Victor Olofsson turn it around? Can Jack Quinn return healthy? Well, so in that case, I would say to Bob, I don't think he would be stunting the growth of anybody in the organization, because if Zach Benson goes off, maybe they cool off a little bit on the idea. Maybe not. I don't know. You know, maybe that the Victor Olofsson spot is still potentially available depending on how he plays. So there's variables still to consider, and I think that's one that's fair to think about.